Okay, good morning. We're going to start our panel. Welcome everyone. I'm sorry about the delay. We have some technical problems, but we'll start right now. This session is going to be recorded on that camera. If anyone wants to speak, just get closer to the microphones so it can be recorded, your question or your comment. And welcome to our colleague from Colombia, which is going to be one of our speakers over here. As you know, the topic of this panel will be climate change, energy transition, and the rule of law in the Americas. Welcome all. The format for this presentation will be as follows. I am Héctor Herrera. I'll be the moderator or chair of this session. And then I will introduce our five great speakers of today from the countries of this continent. I will introduce them later. I will start with some introductory remarks. Each speaker will have up to 7 minutes. We can take a little bit longer or less, but after that, we will open our table for discussions, comments, questions, whatever you like. So please feel free to ask anything you want and make any comment. This is a very open table for discussions. We have many topics to discuss and very controversial topics also. So having said that, I will start with the introductory remarks just to put in context the topics and the perspective we're trying to discuss. But if anyone has a different opinion on these topics, you're welcome to present whatever point or statement you want to make on these issues. This panel will address relevant legal aspects of climate change with focus on the nationally determined contributions for reducing greenhouse gases, energy transitions as necessary tool to reduce greenhouse gases, and the need to migrate from fossil fuels to cleaner sources of energy, and of course, the rule of law as a condition to comply with national and international commitments regarding climate change, energy transition, international trade, and investment. Climate change is a global emergency that goes beyond national borders. It is an issue that requires international cooperation and coordinated solutions at all levels. To tackle climate change and its negative impacts, world leaders of the United Nations Climate Change Conference, also known as COP21 in Paris, reached a breakthrough on December 12, 2015, the historic Paris Agreement. That agreement is a legally binding international treaty on climate change. It was adopted by 196 parties at COP21 in Paris on December 12, 2015, and entered into force on November 4, 2016. Its goal is to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees, preferably to 1.5 degrees Celsius, compared to pre-industrial levels. To achieve this long-term temperature goal, countries aim to reach global peaking of greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible to achieve a climate-neutral world by mid-century. The Paris Agreement is a landmark in the multilateral climate change process because, for the first time, a binding agreement brings all nations into a common cause to undertake ambitious efforts to combat climate change and adapt to its effects. The Paris Agreement works on a 5-year cycle of increasingly ambitious climate actions carried out by countries. By 2020, countries submitted their plans for climate action known as nationally determined contributions, by means of which countries communicate actions they will take to reduce their greenhouse emissions in order to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement. Countries also communicate in the nationally determined contributions actions they will take to build resilience to adapt to the impacts of rising temperatures. With the Paris Agreement, countries establish an enhanced transparency framework. Under that framework, starting in 2024, countries will report transparently on actions taken and progress in climate change mitigation, adaptation measures, and support provided or received. It also provides for international procedures for the review of the submitted reports. The information gathered through the Enhanced Transparency Framework will feed into the global stocktake, which will assess the collective progress towards the long-term climate goals. This will lead to recommendations for countries to set more ambitious plans in the next round. In accordance with the report of the World Meteorological Organization dated October 11, 2022, in order to limit the global temperature rise, which is undermining energy security, electricity tapped from clean energy sources must double over the next 8 years. The energy sector is responsible for around 75% of global greenhouse emissions, and therefore, switching to cleaner energy generation and improving energy efficiency is vital if we're going to thrive into the 21st century. Climate change directly affects fuel supply, energy production, and the physical resilience of current and future energy infrastructure. Heat waves and droughts are already putting existing energy production under stress, making it even more important to reduce fossil fuel emissions, as well as the impact of more frequent and intense extreme weather, water, and climate events. Current renewable energy pledges by countries fall well short of what is needed to reach the goal of universal access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy by 2030 has been indicated by the World Meteorological Organization. Latin American countries generate less greenhouse gases than the US, Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, but are disproportionately suffering from the effects through droughts, hurricanes, and seasonal shifts. The World Bank estimates that 17 million people in Latin America will be forced to relocate within the next 30 years. Latin America and the Caribbean has a great variety of renewable energy resources, but in many cases, still largely untapped. The region, with emissions representing less than 10% of the global total, is highly vulnerable to the consequences of climate change. Nationally determined contributions are at the heart of the Paris Agreement and the achievement of its long-term goals. Nationally determined contributions embody efforts by each country to reduce national emissions and adapt to the impacts of climate change. The Paris Agreement, in its Article 4, Paragraph 2, requires each party to prepare, communicate, and maintain successive nationally determined contributions that it intends to achieve. Parties shall pursue domestic mitigation measures with aim of achieving the objectives of such contributions. It is understood that the peaking of emissions will take longer for developing countries' parties, and that emission reductions are undertaken on the basis of equity and in the context of sustainable development and efforts to eradicate poverty, which are critical development priorities for many developing countries. The nationally determined contributions of Mexico, updated in 2022, indicate apparently more ambitious goals. I emphasize apparently. However, there is an interesting website of the climate action called the Climate Action Tracker, which is an independent scientific project that tracks government climate action and measures it against the globally agreed Paris Agreement through the collaborations of two organizations, Climate Analytics and New Climate Institute, who have been providing independent analysis to policymakers since 2009. In accordance with the Climate Action Tracker, Mexico's climate policy continues to go backwards as fossil fuel is used, prioritized, and climate-related policies and institutions dismantled. Mexico's updated 2030 target of nationally determined contributions submitted in November 2022 results in higher emission levels than the targets from 2016, breaching both agreements under the Paris Agreement and Mexican law, where governments committed to improve their targets over time. The updated national determined contributions lacks transparency and disguises its lack of ambition by counting forests differently in the base and in the target year. Mexico will meet the unambitious target with already implemented policies as emissions continue to rise through 2030. With this update, the Climate Action Tracker rating of Mexico's climate targets and action worsens from highly insufficient to critically insufficient. With these introductory remarks and basic concepts of the Paris Agreement and the current situation of Mexico on this topic, I'd like to introduce our 5 speakers. We have speakers from Argentina, Colombia, US, Italy, and Venezuela this day. Therefore, I will kindly make reference they will kindly make reference to the topics they deem pertinent regarding the general subject matter of this session: climate change, energy transition, and the rule of law in the Americas. And to start the program, just a second, please. Okay, we will start with our great speaker from Argentina. To my left, Carrie Gaard. Thank you very much, Carrie, for coming. She is founding partner of Carrie Gaard Bureau, Green Business Assistance and Eco Diplomacy. She is member of the World League of Environmental Lawyers, where she holds the position as international coordinator. She is current COO and executive coordinator of a multimodal port terminal in Argentina. She has various publications and has participated in various international conferences in the area of climate change. Carrie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you for sharing all this meeting that we are having here and this panel. Mostly, I want to thank the World Jurist Association for the 60th birthday celebration that it is having here. It's very important for us to be together sharing whatever we need to be better. As you know, Argentina is in South America, and my country has vast natural resources in energy and agriculture. Within its 2.8 million square kilometers of territory, it is endowed with extraordinary fertile lands, gas, and lithium reserves, and has great potential for renewable energy. Argentina is a leading food producer with large-scale agricultural and livestock industries. It has significant opportunities in some manufacturing subsectors and innovative services in high-tech industries. After the pandemic, economic activity has recovered faster than expected, with an increase of 10.4% of GDP in 2021 and 5.2% in 2022, after a fall of 9.9%. After the context of COVID-19, economic activity has contracted in the last 4 months of 2022, affected by strict import controls to sustain the accumulation of reserves, while a historic drought limits growth in 2023. If you don't know, Argentina's per capita carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuel contribution and combustion were 388 metric tons per inhabitant in 2020, although per capita in my own country are higher than they were in 1990. And for your recall of all of us, since the 1920s, we are talking about the same subject, climate change. But right now, we are getting to 1.5 degrees of an atmosphere that no one, no matter who you are, where you live, what you have, will survive. Argentina has an average 4.9 metric tons of dioxide carbon per inhabitant, enabling sustainable supply chains to a transportation and production emissions being renewed and being collapsed. We all know that climate change, poverty, inequality are the defining issues of our age. Our ecological footprint of 3.7 global hectares per capita set as the 21st largest economy in the world since 2017. Imagine if all people on Earth had a similar footprint on nature. We will need 2.1 planets, I don't think God created them, to support the consumption of humanity. Argentina's emissions, exclusively forestry, increased by 43% between 1990 and 2014. The trend is expected to pick up, spread towards 2030. Our energy, including transport and agriculture sectors, contribute most to overall emissions. There is a long-term decarbonization strategy in Argentina within the AFOLU sector, which generates 20% of J emissions, and is expected that by 2050, this will come to increase 40%, 50% under agricultural productions and mostly trade. We did a year-on-year decline of 2.5% in 2021. Of course, pandemic hits us all. Though we fall from the 16, 20 kilos of carbon dioxide per head of our cattle to 1,350 kilos of carbon dioxide per head, that is not enough. Our climate is changing with regards to precipitation patterns and temperatures, bringing significant, almost devastating living conditions, driving larger heat waves, rising sea levels, and deadly storms, harming our economy. Higher poverty means chaos, which ends in deaths, droughts, and floods in harvests, with coastal erosion changing infrastructure and ecosystems, devastating our economic activities, our agricultural production, our food. And when we say our food, it's the food of the world, because every country in the world, it's our food. So the fundamental issue here is just the state value is above the citizen, above nature, above God? Does the government exist for the individual, or do individuals exist for the government? Mostly nations have chosen to subordinate the citizen or subject to the life of the state. Economic, climate change, poverty, all the SDGs are only another form of war. That is a socialist point of view, maybe you think, but our federal constitution in Argentina, as amended in 1994, provides general principles for the protection of the environment and empowers the federal government to determine the minimum standards of protection. Man's first law is to watch over his own preservation. His first care he owes to himself, and as soon as he reaches the age of reason, he becomes the only judge of the best means to preserve himself. He becomes his own master. Human rights problems include police abuse, pure prison commodities, of course, women abuse. Economic policy focuses on objectives that are social and production sectors after COVID-19. Restoring this public debt that we have in our country. We are in a ladder to reduce emissions mainly through a decrease in deforestation by 16% by 2030 and by 65% by 2050. Very difficult. This achievement of carbon neutral development by 2050 that we are commanded in United Nations and in the agreement of the Paris and Kyoto Protocol that we already signed. Our motto is unity and freedom, and still so far from it. Law, I think everybody knows here, means the discipline and profession concerned with the customs, practices, and rules of conduct of a community through a controlling authority. And rule, it's a principle governing action, regulations that can be adjusted as needs arises. Rules are flexible and law must be applied. Policies guide thinking and change energy forward a particular direction. Where are we going with this? To a 1.5 degrees overheat in all the world? Totally inhabitable for any creature created? To whom much is given, much is gonna be demanded. People are seen as economic units. All in here are like 100 feet tall. People are pygmies, but together they form a market. We are 46,500 million Argentinians in my country, with United Nations data. Our environmental law, 25,675, sets basis for achieving a sustainable management of the environment and preservation and protection of biodiversity and ecosystems. In our National Action Plan, in forests, and our climate change includes a target of 27 carbon dioxide reduction from any emission by 2030. This is a fact. It's nothing that we do not know in every single country, not ours, not mine. We live in one world. There's no other planet. We cannot live on Mars because that's why we are an Earth planet. And we always tend to say, may God bless you to everyone and everybody. But who God is my country, the politicians, worshiping? Because we are in a devastation and the laws are not being applied. So when we get to the idea of what we are dealing here is the next generations. And we looking for the next generations, our environmental policies are not working. We are talking this through 6 million years, and we are still here by 2030, trying to achieve a strategy that we are not getting over 28 COPs that we are going to be here dealing with in the COP28. But we are still, all of us, trying to be in the rule of law, trying to do the correct thing. That's why policy making for betterness of the future generations must arise now. It's not like we are just sharing or selling something. We're gonna die. And there's no God there that you can say, hey, God, you know what, we are so sorry, can you do another earth for us? Maybe we have to respect the rule, not of man, but the rule of loving each other and the rule of obedience, that we are all in this together. And in my country, literally we submitted 24 different policy making to the Congress, and there was no votes for that, because economic growth for their wallets was better. So my reasoning will be, instead of obeying one another, instead of obeying wallets, instead of obeying countries, instead of obeying politicians that are not doing service to the people, obey love. Nelson Mandela, Winston Churchill, everyone said, there is no law when there is not applied. There is no rules when they are not there to regulate what the people need. Being in a position of a politician doesn't mean that you can do whatever you want. So in my country, this is happening very fast. That's why I think, first of all, women make more active decisions than men. And I will tell you why, and you will laugh. Not because of our hormones, no. Because we are more dedicated to bring love, because God made us love carers. This is why we need more women in positions where they know that nature doesn't have a voice, but has a master, the one who created nature. And we are not here because we created ourselves. So policy making and the rule of law is not the man's rule preservation of himself, of one. The rule of law is the rule that God made for us to order ourselves and have organizations so we can be better, not destroy ourselves and even nature that we didn't even create it. We are not gods. And that's a fact. We are gonna die if we want to 1.5. In my country, there's 45 degrees. You cannot even stay in the sun for 4 hours because you were God burned. And children are dying because of this lack of decision-making. Lack of decision-making of men that are supposed to be giants in their political positions. Well, they are not. They are killing their own race. So my alert here is not only climate change, energy renewable systems or sustainable systems, it's our hearts. Because we need to change our hearts in order to be better to one each other. When we were in the pandemic, everyone was praying to God, the God that nobody goes. And he has one rule, love each other. Loving each other is not giving a kiss and saying, hey, you need water. It's really loving each other. It's making the other one better, not destroy the other one. It's making rules for everyone to live in a condition where we can breathe. And our children and grandchildren that maybe we will not see will be happy. We are in 2023, and we're speaking of this since my grandfather. And I will love to have children and know that I will die knowing that the first rule is not man preservation of himself, but love for one another. When you help another one, you're helping yourself. That's why we are here. The rule of law demonstrates that the law works when it's applied, when regulations are based not in wallets, but in the love for one another. Everyone needs everybody. There is no country in the world that has everything. We need Italy, Mexico, New York, United States, we need Venezuela. Everyone needs everyone. We cannot be alone. We were not created for that. That's why the rule of law works when we apply decisions that make those regulations and law applicable to people and not to ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carrie. Our next speaker is Luis Fernando Macías. He's from Colombia. He's partner of and he's responsible for the area of practice of environmental law of his law firm. He's president of the Environmental Law Commission of the International Union of Lawyers, and he's former head of the legal department of the Ministry of the Environment of Colombia. Bienvenido, Luis Fernando.
Okay, thank you very much, Héctor, for the invitation. I understood that we can talk in English, in Spanish, and I prepared the conference in Spanish, not in English, and I don't manage the English for change in 1 minute the Spanish to English. Okay, sorry, I apologize with who the person don't understand the Spanish. Okay. Mi presentación tiene dos enfoques. El primero, un enfoque desde la filosofía política, y el segundo desde la filosofía jurídica, para concluir aterrizando en el derecho como parte de la transición energética, el rule of law, ¿cierto? Y lo que sería la defensa de los derechos humanos y, obviamente, de la democracia. Desde la filosofía política, ¿cómo la enfoco? La problemática ambiental no es solamente un fenómeno orientado al control de los factores que alteran el medio ambiente. Tiene que ver también con la estabilidad de las sociedades, la estabilidad del Estado. Si ustedes leen las resoluciones de las Naciones Unidas que convocaron a la conferencia de Estocolmo, resoluciones que vienen de finales de los años 60, verán que su principal preocupación es la problemática de la sociedad y la estabilidad de los estados. Si ustedes observan la comisión, leen la comisión Brundtland, en varios apartes de ella, hace referencia a la gran problemática que se generaría como consecuencia de la escasez de alimentos, de los desplazamientos. Es decir, siempre la problemática ambiental y hoy en día el cambio climático está orientado y está enfocado a manifestar y a poner de presente el riesgo para las sociedades, el riesgo para los estados. De ahí porque creo yo que esto hace que sean los estados, y yo sé que en inglés government and state is not the same. There's a big difference. Entonces, cuando hablo del Estado, estoy hablando del Estado en la concepción más digamos, de la tradición europea y latinoamericana que de la concepción tal vez desde el derecho o de la filosofía política americana, que habla más del gobierno o del government, porque no lo podríamos traducir tampoco como gobierno, sería una traducción literal que no da. Entonces, creo que estos aspectos son los que hay que tener en cuenta porque se desestabilizan las sociedades. Y si ustedes leen el Acuerdo de París, en el inicio dice, poniendo de relieve la relación intrínseca que existe entre las medidas, las respuestas y las repercusiones generales por el cambio climático y el acceso equitativo al desarrollo sostenible y la erradicación de la pobreza. Si ustedes trataría, y creo que me alcanza el tiempo, voy a tratar de leerlo en inglés. Dice, emphasizing the intrinsic relationship that climate change action, response and impact have with equitable access to sustainable development and eradication of poverty. Y si vamos a otra parte, dice el Acuerdo de París, reconociendo que el cambio climático es un problema de toda la humanidad y que al adoptar medidas para hacerle frente, las partes deberían respetar, promover y tener en cuenta sus respectivas obligaciones relativas a los derechos humanos, el derecho a la salud, los derechos de los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales, los migrantes, los niños, las personas con discapacidad y las personas en situaciones vulnerables y el derecho al desarrollo, así como la igualdad de género, el empoderamiento de la mujer y la equidad internacional. Si uno lo lee en inglés, dice, acknowledge that climate change is a common concern of humankind. Parties should, when taking action to address climate change, respect, promote, and consider their respective obligation on human rights, the right to health, the right of indigenous people, local communities, migrant children, persons with disabilities, and people in vulnerable situations, and the right to development, as well as gender equality and power of movement and intergenerational equity. Entonces tenemos esa visión que es importante tener en cuenta, es decir, el cambio climático, la transición energética. ¿Por qué la transición energética? Porque está vinculada al desarrollo. La energía es factor de desarrollo. Y hemos vivido de los siglos XVIII, XIX una visión del desarrollo, cierto, particular, que hoy en día está siendo puesta en duda por muchos factores, ¿cierto? Incluso como causante del mismo problema climático. Ese modelo instaurado desde el siglo XVIII y XIX y desarrollado plenamente en el siglo XX, algunos lo consideran como un elemento de estos aspectos. Entonces, todo ese concepto de desarrollo hay que tenerlo en cuenta porque es lo que a nosotros nos ve y es la energía. De ahí por qué la necesidad de la transición energética. En el fondo, la transición energética busca darle una transformación y una nueva lectura a los modelos de desarrollo que vienen del siglo XVIII y XIX. ¿Por qué? Pues porque la generación de energía, ¿cierto?, va a contribuir, o ese cambio en la transición energética, va a contribuir a buscar romper desigualdades de las sociedades actuales, generar un empleo distinto, generar unas condiciones distintas. En el fondo lo que hay es eso. Y es allí donde yo creo que, para abreviar, obviamente, aparece el derecho. El derecho, ¿por qué razón? porque el derecho es el instrumento que tienen los estados, ¿cierto?, para poner en práctica sus visiones. Y el derecho, entonces, son todas las políticas. Si vamos a mi país, desde 2014 se han venido desarrollando leyes que tienen que ver con el cambio climático y se han desarrollado en diversos gobiernos. Incluso aún hoy en el plan de desarrollo quedó incluido el tema de la transición energética actual y hay una fuerza muy grande a pesar de las dificultades y la falta de claridad que ha tenido el gobierno en su política en torno a algunos aspectos de la transición energética, pero no se niega la transición energética. Entonces, buscando ese nuevo desarrollo y una nueva transformación digámoslo, de lo que es ese desarrollo. De ahí porque yo creo que la transición energética contribuye como un elemento más al fortalecimiento del Estado de Derecho, de la democracia, de la superación de las desigualdades de los estados, de todas las sociedades, y donde seguramente contribuirá igualmente al fortalecimiento sobre todo de la democracia, entendida no en su sistema formal, sino en un sistema más profundo, sobre todo para los países latinoamericanos que necesitan superar todas esas desigualdades que son ancestrales algunas, otras generadas, y que vamos a tener que irlas buscando, cómo manejarlas, cómo superarlas, porque de lo contrario está en riesgo la democracia, el Estado de Derecho y obviamente pues la misma supervivencia de las sociedades. Muchas gracias y excuse me for the Spanish, but English.
No, muchas gracias, Luis. Thank you very much, Luis Fernando Macías from Colombia. Our next speaker is Lucila, better known as Luli in New York. Hemmingsen, it's a long story, but Luli for all of her friends. She is partner at King Spalding. She is commercially driven international disputes lawyer that consistently aims to obtain client-focused results in the most efficient and effective manner. She is dual qualified in civil and common law, and her practice focuses on international commercial and investment arbitration and public international law matters, with a particular emphasis in Latin America. Luli advises and represents clients in high-stakes matters conducted in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. She also advises clients on treaty protection, structuring, and handles proceedings ancillary to arbitration before local courts worldwide. Luli also accepts arbitrator appointments in international disputes. Lucila, it is a real honor having you here.
Thank you so much, Héctor, for the very kind introduction, and many thanks to the World Jurist Association, the organizers, and everyone working very hard to make this event such a success. I am grateful and truly honored to be here among such esteemed and distinguished colleagues. I'm here today to focus on the US. So I'm going to cover climate change, energy transition, and the rule of law from the perspective of the USA. So the USA set the goal to achieve an economy-wide target of reducing its net greenhouse gas emissions by 50 to 52% below the 2005 levels by 2030. This was the nationally determined contribution, or NDC, set by the USA. According to the USA, the NDC is both ambitious and achievable. It is in line with the aims of the Paris Agreement, which includes, of course, limiting global average temperature increase by 1.5 degrees Celsius, as well as the need to drive towards a net zero global emissions no later than 2050. At the time of submission, which was in April 2021, the value of 2005 was 6,635 million tons of CO2 emissions in inventory. The target that was set is economy-wide, which means it includes all sectors as defined by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, all greenhouse gases for all categories and all carbon pools. The US NDC was developed based on sector-by-sector assessment via the National Climate Task Force led by the White House Office of the Domestic Climate Policy. So let's put this into context. What does it really mean? The USA, as you're aware, is one of the largest economies in the world. In fact, it's the third largest country in terms of population and geographic area. It's the world's second largest producer and consumer of energy. This creates significant opportunities to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions through energy efficiency, electrification of end users that currently burn fossil fuels, and also carbon-free energy supply. However, this also creates a significant challenge. And with that challenge comes the potential lost opportunity, and as such, continued emissions in vast proportions that affect the remainder of the planet. I'd like to turn now to the climate action tracker that Héctor mentioned in his introductory remarks, as it does provide an objective, neutral review and assessment of each of the countries' progress on their goals and commitments. As I've noticed at the start of my speech, USA has established an NDC aim to reduce 50 to 52% of its 2005 carbon dioxide emissions. And the USA also said that this was achievable. However, according to the Climate Action Tracker's objective reviews and assessment, that goal is looking very far from being achievable. In fact, USA efforts have been deemed to be insufficient to achieve its own goals. So where does the US actually stand? According again to the Climate Action Tracker, they have set different ratings and different metrics. The overall rating that they set for the USA is insufficient. In respect of policies and action, the rating is again insufficient. In terms of the fair share target, which means whether the US is meeting its fair share of contributing towards a greener climate, the rate is again insufficient. In terms of the domestic target, it's almost insufficient. And in terms of climate finance, which means whether the US is actually contributing financially towards improving the climate change, it's critically insufficient. In terms of the comprehensiveness of the plans in place to achieve the net zero target at 2050, that the Climate Action Tracker has rated US efforts as average. Finally, in terms of land use and forestry, they have been determined as not significant, which means not enough work is being done. So what specific actions has indeed the USA undertaken, and what have you seen have been progress, and what can be done differently? In August 2022, President Biden signed into law the Inflation Reduction Act. It's the most ambitious and potentially impactful climate policy legislation in US history. Indeed, it sets the country's emissions on a trajectory towards meeting climate commitment to cut greenhouse gases by half by 2030. Below the 2005 levels, but more action is required to get there. Indeed, while the IRA marks a radical shift in US climate action and is focused on moving emissions firmly towards a downward trajectory, and that helps to send a global signal that one of the world's largest historical emitters is actually finally working towards its goals, unfortunately the efforts have not been deemed to be enough. More work is needed. So if the US does intend to meet its NDC goals, it will need additional regulation, additional legislation, more policies, and more financing committed to the climate goals. The Climate Action Tracker estimates that under the current policies, the US would likely only achieve an emissions reduction of about 26 to 42% below the 2005 levels by 2030. That is considerably lower than the target of 50 to 52% below the 2005 levels that the US has set for itself. That is what explains the rating of insufficient and almost insufficient. In terms of international climate finance, the efforts, while they have been there and have increased in the last few years, unfortunately have also been deemed to be lacking. The Congress approved a $1 billion for international climate finance in 2022. But this is significantly less than the $11.2 billion a year by 2024 that President Biden had pledged to provide in September 2021. Some commentators have in fact deemed this to be concerning because it might undermine the credibility of US intentions to line up as a global leader on climate change. This investment is insufficient, and commentators have indicated that it does not cover its fair share contribution. Further, some commentators have even criticized the IRA by saying that it is a watered-down version of the more ambitious Build Back Better bill that stalled in the US Senate previously. Indeed, the IRA injects $369 billion to develop and deploy clean energy technologies and investments essential to the decarbonization of the economy in the medium to long term. However, this is a very small portion of the funds originally committed, which were $1.75 trillion that were included in the Build Back Better bill that was stalled. Turning now to how the US is addressing the fossil fuel industry, which, as we know, is one of the biggest carbon emitters and the biggest problems for climate change. The IRA provides several concessions for the fossil fuel industry, such as requiring minimum acreage of public land for drilling leases. Many have argued that these concessions in fact contradict President Biden's promise on his first day in office to ban new oil and gas drilling on federal lands. Commentators, in fact, have noticed that the approach in fossil fuels has been a lot more lenient than anticipated and most likely than needed to be able to achieve the goals that were established by the US. Indeed, prior to the IRA, President Biden's actions to address inflation and other effects of high oil and gas prices in the short term may have compromised his long-term climate goals. For example, the US has banned imports of the Russian oil and gas in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But as a result, to compensate for that loss, the loss of the Russian oil supply, President Biden has released 1 million barrels of oil per day from the nation's reserves for 6 months, announced plans to hold first oil and gas leasing since it took office, and has encouraged oil and gas producers to drill and increase production. So following a steep decrease in emissions in 2020 as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, emissions have bounced back in the US economy as it recovered in 2021. Unfortunately, I'm sad to confirm that emissions have now returned to the same pre-pandemic levels that we had. I want to touch briefly on other measures that the US have taken to address climate change and the energy transition. One notable aspect is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. It was signed into law in November 2021 and is aimed to spur economic recovery and update the country's infrastructure while accelerating climate action. The act, in fact, has marked at the time the largest federal investment into infrastructure projects in more than a decade, and includes investment in a wide range of areas that can indirectly enable transition to a low-carbon economy, including development of EV charging infrastructure, upgrading the power grid, improving energy efficiency, and electrification of buildings. In June 2022, however, the US Supreme Court hindered the US progress in terms of climate change by ruling to limit the Environmental Protection Agency's ability to regulate carbon emissions from power plants. This was indeed not a positive move in favor of USA's climate goals. Many have argued indeed that the decision sets worrying precedent for more cases coming through the courts that could affect other aspects of future climate action. The silver lining, I guess, would be that indeed, despite this decision, cheaper renewables and our decarbonizing US power sector, they continue to evolve, they continue to expand, and they are continue to drive coal out of the electricity market, and the court decision is very unlikely to change that. Another important measure is that the US took important action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in 2 different sectors. One was the transport sector. The Biden administration reversed one of the most detrimental rollbacks from the Trump era and set stricter fuel economy and GHG emission standards for passenger vehicles for models years 2023 to 2026. And in the industry sector, the administration enacted a bill to phase down the production and consumption of hydrofluorocarbons over the next 15 years. So indeed, President Biden and his administration have set goals to decarbonizing the power sector by 2035 in line with the Paris Agreement. Turning now to the rule of law. The main concern, as one of the major emitters in the world, is that the US does not meet its fair share and indeed is not on track to meet its commitments in 2035 and in 2050. This could have negative consequences for the planet, and it could also lead to legal repercussions and actions. Potential actions could include litigation and arbitration against the US to prompt government to meet its commitments and obligations under international treaties. The resulting effects of climate change, as have been discussed already here by my colleagues, include droughts, fires, insufficient energy, weather changes affecting crops and food production. These are consequences that have effect on vast portions of the world population. These consequences, in fact, affect basic human rights. As such, these consequences can be tied to government and private actors' inaction or insufficient action when it comes to meeting the climate goals. In that sense, this inaction could lead to responsibility for not taking appropriate measures, leading to having the US as target for legal proceedings, forcing the government to repay for harm suffered as a result of the consequences of this inaction. It would not be an easy feat, of course, from a causation and evidentiary perspective, but I can envision those type of actions brewing in the coming years. In fact, this represents a very difficult juggling act for all states, as they are also obliged to be aware of commitments made to foreign investors entering the country, which could also have viable claims against the government if the regulatory and legislative environment in which they invested is changed as a result of the state's measures to abide by their climate change goals. This, of course, depends on a case-by-case analysis of the specific treaties, but we are seeing already cases being brought against states for measures enacting, reducing, for example, coal emission plans or other aspects that do contribute to the climate change. At a private level, we have also seen in a recent example of this type of litigation that is coming up is a case brought against the board of Shell in the UK courts, that resulting from the alleged lack of action by Shell to meet climate change goals and targets. I'm not going to comment on the validity of these actions or the underlying causes, but the point that I'm trying to make is there is legal action that is being raised, it's brewing against private actors, against states, for different actions completely and directly related to climate change, the measures taken or the measures not taken. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is from Italy, Mr. Lucio Ghia. He's founding partner of the Studio Legale Ghia. He's in charge of the legal offices in Rome and Milan, being his main field of activity is civil law, and in particular commercial law, international arbitration, bankruptcy law, banking law, climate and environmental law. He is professor of commercial law and international commercial law at University Guglielmo Marconi of Rome, and he was president of the World Jurist Association from 1995 to 1997. It's a real honor to have you, Lucio. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Héctor. And thank you for the work made by you in preparing that panel. I appreciate it. Yes, I think I am a witness of the old story, long story of World Jurist Association. I remember Charles Ryan, our founder, at that time, beginning of my career in the World Jurist Association. I remember I was president for Europe. And I remember his lesson. Already Cicerone, 2,000 years ago, said, "Subiecti legibus sumus, ut vivere liberi possimus." And Charles Ryan added, the law exists, we have a lot of law. The problem is made the people observe the law. Mm-hmm. And it will be possible to control the enforcement of the law. So I studied with my assistant, and I thank them, Eleonora in a special way, because our client, two banks, gave to our office a commitment. Study the consequences of the new directive, European directive, and the new rules, regolamenti, not only European, but also by the European Central Bank and the Association European Bank. The problem is find a factor, an element, substantial element, that oblige people, economic people, to observe the law. And that element is only one, the money. People need new finance to make business, to produce goods, industrial, commercial, services. When the people ask for money, the economical balance, it is not enough. Now, the bank have to observe that there is another balance, ecological balance, social balance, government balance inside the companies. And if exists that element, the bank make loan, give finance. In other case, they can give finance, but the cost of the money is very, very high. I think that could be a good framework to oblige people to be close to the sustainability of the planet, because this rule is general rule. It's not Italian, European. I think every part of the world could achieve that kind of result. Well, I think that I agree with Carrie, with Luis. Our representation is very right. It's also 42, 43 degrees with humidity in Rome. It's exceptional. It's unbelievable. But happened. So now the question that I try to offer a solution are the bridge between banks and finance entity and the new finance asked by sustainable companies. It is first question. The second one, what behavior must companies in Europe, because I cannot speak about Americas, obviously.
But we might get some financing from
we
Europe.
approve
So.
that.
So we need the money. So.
We need a lot.
Thank you. Must companies in Europe take in order to be able to call themselves sustainable? Sustainability holds a strategic status in business practices. It is useful in order to generate collective well-being and reduce the impact of the planet. The shift toward green business for companies, and in particular the world of finance, is not more left to the will of the individual, because that is a very important topic. but is regulated within, in Europe, the 2018 European Action Plan, which aims to direct member states toward the capital market that ensures sustainability, inclusive growth, and financial stability. The European Action Plan included the so-called taxonomy regulation, adopted by European Parliament and Council with the Regulament EU 2020-852, through which the EU has provided its member states some guidelines for the world of finance, banks, governments, and companies in order to indicate how sustainable and an investment actually is, and to report their impact on the environment through financial reporting, so-called DNF. In assessing a company's eco-sustainability, banks and financiers, in order to grant credit, must take into account not only economic performance, but also social and environmental performance. And to this purpose, ESG, environmental, social, and governance criteria, prove to be necessary indicators. There are extra financial parameters that increase the available information regarding the company in order to make an assessment of its eco-sustainability. Environmental factor is a business, under bank point of view, is sustainable and responsible if it reduces greenhouse gas emission, does not pollute, protect biodiversity, uses renewable energy sources, such as solar panels, controls the use of raw materials and water resources, and manages the recycling of waste products and packaging. Social factor is embodied, for example, in human resource development, quality of working environment and supply chain, attention to gender equality, diversity, and inclusion. Governance, management factor, concerns ethics and transparency control policies and procedure. In case of joint stock of companies, shareholder right, composition, independence, and remuneration of the board of the directors. The taxonomy regulation establishes 3 general conditions that a business must meet in order to qualify the environmentally sustainable. Making a substantial contribution to at least one of 6 environmental goals: climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, sustainable use and protection of water and marine resources, transition to a circular economy, pollution prevention and control, the protection and the restoration of biodiversity and ecosystems. Second point is don't cause significant harm to any of the environmental objectives. Third, be performed in compliance with minimum social guarantees, such as, for example, those provided by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD guidelines, and the United Nations document. Predicting environmental risk, whatever it is natural, is a necessary start point for operating in marketplace today and in the near future, for lending institutions through business and their supplies to individual clients. To achieve effect eco-sustainable change, a virtuous change is needed through which the European directives, the principle of ECB and also the Bank of Italy, as well as a respective national regulation, come to influence individuals as well. The ultimate goal can only be achieved through a cascading conditioning whereby each individual component of the chain influences through incentive the next. Therefore, banks, by favoring and granting better financing terms to companies that comply with the ESG principle, will lead to an increase in the number of companies adopting a green business plan. Second, companies, in order to obtain financing, will use suppliers who adopt environmentally friendly management guidelines, and as a result, in order to be competitive in the market, will lead stockists to use and supply increasing environmentally sustainable raw materials. Third, suppliers, therefore, by providing zero environmental impact, recycled and recyclable materials, will educate consumers to seek goods that are green and environmentally friendly. Finally, four, consumers will be led to adopt ecosystem and biodiversity-friendly conduct in their daily lives as well. In summary, at the level of economic thinking, there has been a shift from the traditional idea of what is good for business is also good for society, to the radically opposite concept of what is good for the ecosystem and society is also good for business. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jesús. Thank you very much. And last but not least, Mr. Jesús Eduardo Troconis Heredia from Venezuela. He's professor of international law and chief of Catedra Mario Villaroel at Universidad Carlos III. Welcome, professor.
If you allow, I would like to express myself in Spanish.
Sure. Please use the microphone. For the recording, yes. Para la grabación.
Bueno, yo comienzo por saludar las muy buenas intervenciones de todos ustedes que me han precedido en la exposición. Y voy a introducir mi exposición, que viene a cuento perfectamente por el título de la mesa. El mejor aporte que se puede hacer, estoy convencido de ello, a la lucha contra el cambio climático es promover la transición energética. Porque la verdad sea dicha, ninguna de las fuentes de energía está en capacidad de imponer su criterio totalmente, en vista de que todas adolecen de algún defecto fundamental. Esto me recuerda, esto lo digo aquí en el libro que publiqué el año pasado, Energía, Política y Derecho Internacional. Pero voy a traer a colación la definición que dio Sebrinsky, asesor de seguridad del presidente Bush. No llegó a ser secretario de Estado, aunque de hecho actuaba como tal. Él decía, y yo lo comparto absolutamente, de que la geopolítica es la gestión de los intereses de cada uno de los estados. Pero enseguida él iba directamente a reducir ese concepto a uno, conforme al cual la geopolítica no es otra cosa que la disputa por el dominio de las fuentes de energía entre los países consumidores y los países productores de petróleo o de gas, o en definitiva de otros productos que permiten la existencia y satisfacen las necesidades del hombre y de los estados. Ellos buscan, los países consumidores, adecuar sus necesidades, satisfacer, asegurar su provisión de los hidrocarburos, justamente para atender a la ecuación aquella de que a mayor desarrollo, mayor necesidad energética. Pero nosotros tenemos que procurar una diversificación de esas fuentes de energía. Y ahí es donde entra la oportunidad de hacer de la transición energética la conjugación de los hidrocarburos, que tienen a su cargo una dimensión extraordinaria y que tienen un peso fundamental, más del 70%. Todos los países del mundo necesitan de los hidrocarburos. Pero tenemos que buscar avanzar tecnológicamente para que sean menos contaminantes. Y tenemos que avanzar también en la integración dentro de ese gran concepto de la transición energética, que se incorporen las nuevas energías, las energías limpias, las energías verdes. Bueno, estamos absolutamente en concordancia con lo que decía nuestro speaker, el señor Hidalgo, con lo que decía la profesora o jurista Carrie, con lo que exponía mi querido y apreciado amigo Luis Macías de Colombia, con lo que afirmaba Lucila y con lo que también sostenía el maestro Neto, Ghia, Lucio. Entonces, ¿qué es lo que nos corresponde hacer? Constatar una realidad dramática, pero también producir una solución, una respuesta, porque todos sabemos que ese choque que hoy existe en la búsqueda del aprovisionamiento de los hidrocarburos en particular ha llevado a una convulsión extraordinaria, casi nos ha puesto en la antesala de una tercera guerra mundial. La agresión de la Federación Rusa a Ucrania. Bueno, eso tiene que ser muy tomado en cuenta, porque el leitmotiv en general de la explotación de los hidrocarburos ha sido el desencuentro. Hay guerras o enfrentamientos bélicos terribles, pero también hay guerras o enfrentamientos bélicos de baja intensidad, como los hay en África. Pero lo que ha sucedido con la Federación Rusa, ha roto absolutamente la existencia del Estado de Derecho internacional, porque siendo Rusia, nada más y nada menos que miembro del Consejo de Seguridad, que tiene a su cargo salvaguardar la seguridad y la paz mundiales, es ella, es la Federación Rusa, la antigua Unión de Repúblicas Socialistas Soviéticas, quien atenta contra la convivencia, quien atenta con la vida democrática y en libertad que constituye un desideratum, y siempre lo ha sido, de Occidente, del Estado occidental. Entonces, en definitiva, nosotros tenemos que buscar eliminar esos peligros que ya han sido y fueron anunciados, pero desde el año 17. Desde el año 17, cuando se escribió por la mano de Lenin, que tenía un solo objetivo: acabar con el Estado de Occidente en primer término y eliminar el sufragio, es decir, eliminar la democracia, que es el único sistema, con todos sus defectos, sabemos bien, que nos permite la convivencia pacífica, la vida democrática, la vida en libertad. Entonces, todo lo que hagamos tiene que tener ese objetivo final: mantenernos en la vida de lo que antiguamente los doctrinarios del derecho internacional público decían, lo que nos proponían los países civilizados. Que eso ha cambiado, desde luego, pero que no deja de ser hoy en día una advertencia realmente hasta terrorífica, que nos pongamos absolutamente de acuerdo para mantener ese sistema que nos permite disfrutar de la libertad. Yo no puedo dejar de mencionar lo que ha sucedido en mi país, en Venezuela. Es para mí inevitable decirles que ha ocurrido el milagro de que un país exportador rico de recursos de todo orden ha sido devastado y se ha impuesto una dictadura realmente sin precedentes en la historia del país, que Venezuela ha tenido largos años bajo el autoritarismo, ¿no? Militar. Pero nosotros hoy en día importamos hasta la gasolina. La empresa del Estado, PDVSA, se ha reducido a la mínima expresión, ha sido destruida. Y de 3.600.000 millones de barriles diarios que producíamos para el año 2002, hoy no llegamos ni siquiera a 650.000 barriles diarios, con la responsabilidad grave de proveer domésticamente, que nos parece que no lo logramos. Estamos importando gasolina y petróleo, repito. Y como si esto fuera poco, tenemos en este momento una disputa por el territorio Esequibo en la Corte Internacional de Justicia, que trata de remover un laudo arbitral absolutamente inválido, írrito, porque, como ustedes bien saben, la jurisdicción internacional funciona sobre la base del consentimiento del Estado. Eso es una regla absolutamente rígida, inflexible y acertada. Pertenece al mundo del jus cogens. Entonces nosotros no podemos ahora ni siquiera entablar un pleito, por así decirlo, en la Corte Penal Internacional porque estamos absolutamente sin voluntad política en Venezuela, sino que ha sido trasladada a Cuba. Entonces el problema nuestro es realmente a partir de la explotación de los hidrocarburos hemos llegado a esto, después de 200 años de vida independiente, hemos llegado a esta tragedia que hoy conocemos. Yo no podía dejar de decirlo, tenía que responder como respondió mi querida panelista por Argentina, que dijo lo que sentía, como lo dijo Macías sobre Colombia y como lo apuntaste tú en relación a México. De manera que es todo cuanto tengo que decir, siguiendo la idea que ustedes se adelantaron en plantear. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much to all our speakers. We are running out of time, but for those who want to stay, we might stay just 5-10 minutes for questions and answers, should it be the case. But let me summarize what we all have said on this session. I hope I'm not wrong, but basically, my understanding of the perspective of Argentina, Colombia, the U.S., Venezuela, and Italy, and Mexico, is my first conclusion or my first common knowledge of what we all have said is we are not compliant with the Paris Agreement. The international community agreed that we have a serious problem with emissions, greenhouse emissions, particularly carbon dioxide. And we all agree to execute an international agreement, and we all agree to make commitments for the reductions of emissions. The truth is that not only the countries represented on this table are not complying, but most of the countries of the international community are not complying. So from the perspective of the rule of law, and because we're running out of time, I would like just to give you some thoughts to work how can we help solve this problem as lawyers. And I like to take the perspective of Argentina, which I really like it, from a human rights perspective of the problem, but also from Colombia and the U.S., the economic and the commercial perspective, but also the financing perspective, which is very, very important. And of course, democracy. Without democracy, there is no justice. Without justice, there is no control of emissions. Well, we don't even talk about environmental law. So, if we're not complying, I would think, what can we do in our legal systems? For instance, in the case of the United States, Canada, and Mexico, we do have free trade agreements. And therefore, if you don't comply with your environmental commitments of other international treaties, you cannot invoke the Paris Agreement for non-compliance and take legal action under the Paris Agreement. But under commercial treaties, you might bring legal actions for non-compliance. For instance, if as consequence of not complying with the reduction of emissions by the government in your country, that creates situations, let's say, of unfair competition with competitors of other countries investing in your country, they might bring legal actions, am I wrong or not? But they might, depending on the case, but they might bring, and we have cases between Mexico and the United States and Canada. saying, hey, I'm investing in this country, we're working on electric cars, a lot of investments in the US, and they come to Mexico, and suddenly the government is creating a monopoly of the state for the production of oil, and so they will wait. So we can have, but depending on the legal system of your country, and depending whether you have free trade agreements or other commercial agreements that somehow relate to unfair competition. So in that scenario, you might consider non-compliance with these environmental commitments as a violation, perhaps, of your own constitution, or in the legal systems where you, like Mexico, where international treaties become part of Mexican law and even have a rank equal or sometimes higher than the Constitution, and therefore you can bring legal actions indirectly. It will be a commercial dispute, but somehow we can take legal actions. And briefly, the other aspect, the human rights aspect, is also very important. So most of our constitutions somehow provide for the human right for a healthy environment, with different words in every country. But basically, we have the right for a healthy environment. So if that constitution is not respected, well, most of the legal systems provide legal actions to fight against that. So if the negative impacts of emissions is causing health problems or people dying, which is happening in Mexico and many other countries, that's a fact. People is dying, people is getting sick, and the environment is being affected. That's out of discussion. The real question is, can we bring a legal action in our legal system to make the government respect our human rights? Let me say, in the Mexican case, we have what we call the amparo trial, or a trial for the protection of constitutional rights. And if you bring evidence that as consequence of that pollution or emissions, because of the lack of actions or negligence of the government, you're suffering directly effects on your health or your community, then anyone in the community can bring the legal action of that. But I'm not just speculating. I'm not saying this is the way it should be, but since we already run out of time and we don't have time for questions and answers, I really apologize. I just give you these brief thoughts. There are a lot of thinking on these issues, but my final conclusion is that as lawyers, we have to be very creative on advising our clients and the people and the communities, and somehow contribute for the respect of our constitutions, for the respect of our human rights. Again, be creative, because always the excuse is that the Paris Agreement brings legal actions to pursue and enforce it. Yeah, it's true, but there are other ways to go around. You know, lawyers don't break the law. We bend them a little bit, but we never break the law. So, with this comment, I would like to finalize and thank you all. First, the speakers for this great panel we have. I'm very sorry about the timing. Thank you very much for coming. It's been a real pleasure sharing the panel with all of you. Lucy, Luis, Carrie, Lucio, and my friend from Venezuela. Thank you very much. Thank you all. We're finished. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we have one question. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, no, I just have one question because I'm from Colombia, actually.
All right.
I'm also working in the part, and I'm just concerned about one point in Latin America that is connected with the food security. You know, that is something that is very important for the world right now. I would like to ask, what would be the strategy in South America to confront all the problems that we are having with climate change, agriculture, and food security?
Anyone wants to take the, please.
I would conclude with a little bit point of optimism. Mexico, Italy, Colombia have a great fortune, natural resource, sun and wind. in Italy, we have 30% of the energy consumed in the country green. And now the political, agriculture political is pushing for the solar panel that respect the agriculture existent. Solar panel, agriculture, high panel, and under the, and for that reason, the bank, also our client bank, are measuring the technologically possibility to realize that kind of solutions, because that solution are accompanied by a state financing, 60% in favor, 60% are gift, but they control the realization of those kind of technological advanced panel solar in respecting the agricultural resource. That is could be a solution, because in Mexico we have Pemex. Pemex is a state company. Pemex sell oil, petrol, and Pemex could enforce the possibility, could support the possibility to make that kind of investment, agricultural, solar energy, and to live better. I think it is a good promotion for that kind of solution. Technology and the blessing of sun and wind.
That's the point. Nature is perfect. We men, we are set to put the hands there, and we just damage things. The restoration of the soul, the fertilization of the soul, make different crops and different distribution of agricultural for footprint. So by restoring the soil itself, we will make amazing new crops that we are not doing, because we are acquiring another economic aspect. And like my colleague here, by the way, it's an honor to have you here. In Venezuela, he has a great country like every country that we have. Unfortunately, there's no unity in what they think. Division makes everything so wrong and to the wrong results. We need independence, yes or yes, of the powers in the state. The rule of law needs freedom. For that, we need independence. So if we have independence in everything of the three powers of democracy, we will have this footprint that we all need. The restoration of the nature, we are not doing it ourselves. It's perfect. When you just leave the nature act, it heals. We just touch it and we damage it for nothing. And that's what I think that the footprint is one of the basic, or the fossil fuel combustion, because of the cattle, because of every single of the countries that we are dealing with, finances that we don't have, but if we have them, we don't use it. I mean, we in Argentina were like the World Bank financed a lot for footprint. We didn't see it, because these powers that are not independent, they are together for one purpose, economic growth of their wallets. That's the thing. So nature doesn't need human beings to damage them. We need nature for ourselves. So for eating, we just need to have one heart for everything. I think that it's not a matter of commerce, it's not a matter of trade, of economy. It's a matter of how we do things in everything. The rule of law is to order human beings, to organize communities, to have rules so we can be together in unity, togetherness. There's now eco-villages in every single country. Eco-villages have their own rules, they are organic footprints, they live for the nature, but they don't have our other aspects that the rule of law have, like freedom. They are just like a cult because they distort and divide everything, and that is not it. That's why we have these regulations. So the footprint is one of the most incredible, not touchable basic that we don't speak about. And footprint, it's very important because everyone needs food to survive.
About food production, what among the various negative effects of climate change are droughts and floods. And therefore, there's going to be an impact in agriculture and the production of food for people and animals, both. And definitely, we will not have to wait. We already have an international crisis of water and food production. If you add the increase of population in South America, plus climate change, plus water crisis, plus migration and other problems, lack of democracy, lack of respect of the rule of law, corruption, etc., I would say that the future of the economies and in the area of agriculture and food production will depend on the ability of each country in South America to evolve their agricultural production. We cannot continue the inefficient way we are producing. When we talk about my country, we produce in a very inefficient manner some products like corn, for instance, and we don't even produce enough for the country, so we are importing from the U.S., for instance. And the Americas is the richest continent of water, and we have people dying because of lack of water. We are very inefficient on water for agriculture, so we have everything to improve. But perhaps political willingness might be the greatest challenge we're going to face, and I guess lawyers we can push a lot. But I don't have the numbers, but I'm sure United Nations have some statistics and numbers. But my conclusion is yes, there's going to be an impact on production because of floods and droughts. There's no doubt about it. But the impacts will be different on our countries. It's not the same, let's say, the weather and agriculture of Argentina and Brazil or Mexico or Colombia. They're totally different. And I understand in Mexico, for instance, scientific institutions already have plans that tell you that in the next 20, 30 years, some rich lands will be deserts. So we know that in advance. So one way, but again, that's evolving. Agriculture must evolve. Agricultural communities must be educated on new ways of production, new systems, water saving, environmental issues. But your question is very interesting. We don't have time to go further, but there's no doubt there will be a crisis. We already have a crisis, but it's going to be worse. And again, it will depend on the capacity to evolve in each country. So the challenge is not continue what we're doing already, but continuing in a new manner, saving water, being more efficient. That takes money that perhaps some Italian banks might give us a loan. And that requires environmental financing. But most of all, and let me emphasize, in Latin America, the biggest problem we have is political willingness.
And lack of coordination.
And that depends on the people when they vote, whatever party they want. But as long as we don't force our votes to encourage politicians to do the right thing, we will continue suffering.
Yeah, and as Latin America is stable, I would like to highlight the finish that, of course, we can be the food providers in the world.
Yes.
That's why we have to be together. We cannot
Yes,
be,
totally. Yes.
We are next to Venezuela, we
Yes.
are next to Ecuador, we are next to Peru, and also to Brazil. And we have two of the most
Yes.
We have water, we have land, we have
Well,
space.
by migration, we are all together because every single country has a lot of people in other countries. So, like, we are one right now. Like, not politicians, but the people are one.
So thank you very much. Please bring your thoughts again to the next meeting, the meetings in your country. Let's make a lot of noise on these ideas to make some changes. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Thank you.